The warm summer breeze rustled through the trees as DeAndre Johnson walked home from basketball practice, his sneakers scuffing against the sun-baked sidewalk of his South Side Chicago neighborhood. At just 15 years old, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that belied his age, something his grandmother had instilled in him since he was young. That ordinary Tuesday afternoon in 2019 started like any other, but fate had different plans. As DeAndre rounded the corner onto Marshall Boulevard, he heard a sound that made him stop in his tracks, a muffled cry for help coming from the direction of the small convenience store his family frequently visited. His heart raced as he approached the source of the distress call. There, leaning against her patrol car, was Officer Rebecca Thompson, one hand pressed against the side of her vehicle, the other cradling her heavily pregnant belly. Even from a distance, DeAndre could see the pain etched across her face. Years of his grandmother's wisdom echoed in his mind: when someone needs help, you help. No questions asked. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the officer, his basketball duffel bag bouncing against his back. "Ma'am, are you okay?" DeAndre called out, maintaining a respectful distance to avoid startling her. Officer Thompson looked up, relief flooding her features as she saw the young man approaching. I think I'm going into labor," she managed through gritted teeth. "My partner's responding to an emergency call across town, and my radio's malfunctioning." Another contraction hit, causing her to grip the car door tighter. DeAndre's mind raced. His mother worked as a nurse at Mercy Hospital, and he'd heard enough of her stories to know this situation was serious. The nearest hospital was at least 20 minutes away by car, and Officer Thompson clearly couldn't drive herself. "My phone's dead," Officer Thompson breathed heavily, "and I can't reach my backup." Without missing a beat, DeAndre pulled out his phone. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed 911, but his voice remained steady as he clearly explained the situation to the dispatcher. "We're at the corner of Marshall Boulevard and 23rd Street. Officer needs immediate medical assistance. She's pregnant and in labor." The dispatcher assured him help was on the way, but warned it might take up to 15 minutes due to heavy traffic and an ongoing situation downtown. DeAndre knew they needed to act faster. "My mom's a nurse at Mercy," he told Officer Thompson. "She taught me some breathing exercises for emergencies. Would you like to try them?" The officer nodded gratefully, and DeAndre began guiding her through the techniques he'd learned from watching his mother help pregnant neighbors. "Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it, just like that." As they waited, DeAndre noticed the officer's legs beginning to shake. DeAndre's mind raced. His mother worked as a nurse at Mercy Hospital, and he'd heard enough of her stories to know this situation was serious. The nearest hospital was at least 20 minutes away by car, and Officer Thompson clearly couldn't drive herself. "My phone's dead," Officer Thompson breathed heavily, "and I can't reach my backup." Without missing a beat, DeAndre pulled out his phone. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed 911, but his voice remained steady as he clearly explained the situation to the dispatcher. "We're at the corner of Marshall Boulevard and 23rd Street. Officer needs immediate medical assistance. She's pregnant and in labor." The dispatcher assured him help was on the way, but warned it might take up to 15 minutes due to heavy traffic and an ongoing situation downtown. DeAndre knew they needed to act faster. "My mom's a nurse at Mercy," he told Officer Thompson. "She taught me some breathing exercises for emergencies. Would you like to try them?" The officer nodded gratefully, and DeAndre began guiding her through the techniques he'd learned from watching his mother help pregnant neighbors. "Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it, just like that." As they waited, DeAndre noticed the officer's legs beginning to shake. Without prompting, he retrieved his clean basketball towel from his duffel bag and spread it on the ground, creating a makeshift seat for her to rest against the car's tire. "What's your name?" Officer Thompson asked between contractions, clearly trying to stay focused through the pain. "DeAndre Johnson, ma'am." I live over on Albany with my mom and grandmother. Your family must be very proud of you, DeAndre," she managed a smile. Not many people would stop to help these days. DeAndre thought about his father, who'd been incarcerated when he was just 7 years old. The memory of his last words rang clear: "Be better than me, son. Be the change this neighborhood needs." The wail of approaching sirens cut through their conversation. Within minutes, an ambulance and 2 patrol cars arrived on the scene. As the paramedics took over, Officer Thompson reached for DeAndre's hand. "Thank you," she said firmly, making eye contact with him. "You stayed calm when I couldn't. That means everything." What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not only DeAndre's life but his entire family's future. As the ambulance departed, one of the responding officers, Lieutenant David Chen, approached DeAndre. "That was Officer Thompson's first day back after a difficult pregnancy," he explained. "She's been having complications. Your quick thinking and calm response might have prevented serious complications for both her and the baby." DeAndre shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone should do." "But not what everyone would do," Lieutenant Chen replied, pulling out his business card. "We need more young men like you in our community. Have you ever considered a future in law enforcement or emergency services?" The question caught DeAndre off guard. Growing up on the South Side, his relationship with law enforcement had been complicated at best. His father's imprisonment had left deep scars, and many of his friends viewed the police with suspicion. But standing there, holding Lieutenant Chen's card, DeAndre felt something shift inside him. He thought about Officer Thompson's gratitude, about his grandmother's teachings about helping others, about his father's last words about being the change. As he walked home that evening, his phone buzzed with messages from witnesses who had recorded the incident. The video was already circulating on social media, but DeAndre didn't care about the attention. His mind was on Officer Thompson and her baby, hoping they were both okay. When he finally reached home, his grandmother was waiting on the porch, a knowing smile on her face. Someone had already called her about what happened. She opened her arms, and for a moment, DeAndre was a little boy again, safe in his grandmother's embrace. "Your grandfather would be so proud," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He always said our family was meant for greater things." That night, as DeAndre lay in bed, Lieutenant Chen's card on his nightstand, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a random event. It felt like the beginning of something bigger, something that could bridge the gaps in his community. Little did he know, Officer Thompson's husband was a prominent civil rights attorney who had been working on reform initiatives within the criminal justice system. The very system that had taken DeAndre's father away might now offer a path toward healing and change, not just for his family, but for countless others in his community. As he drifted off to sleep, DeAndre thought about Officer Thompson's words, "Your family must be very proud." For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his father's absence lift slightly, replaced by a glimmer of hope for what the future might hold. This was just the beginning of a story that would challenge perceptions, break down barriers, and prove that sometimes the most powerful changes start with a simple act of kindness on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The following day dawned with an unexpected buzz in DeAndre's neighborhood. The video of his encounter with Officer Thompson had gained traction overnight, spreading far beyond their South Side community. As he prepared for school, his grandmother called him into the kitchen, where the local morning news played on their small TV. "Breaking news from Chicago's South Side," the anchor announced, where a teenage boy's quick thinking may have saved the lives of both a police officer and her unborn child. The footage, captured by a convenience store security camera, showed DeAndre's calm demeanor as he assisted Officer Thompson. DeAndre's mother, Lisa, watched the report with tears in her eyes. As a nurse who'd spent 15 years in Mercy Hospital's emergency room, she recognized the professional composure her son had displayed. "You remembered everything I taught you about helping pregnant women in distress," she said softly, pulling him into a tight hug. At school, DeAndre tried to maintain his normal routine, but word had spread quickly. His basketball coach pulled him aside before first period. "Johnson, what you did yesterday, that's the kind of character we talk about in this program. Leadership isn't just about what happens on the court." During lunch, DeAndre's phone buzzed with a message from Lieutenant Chen. Officer Thompson had successfully delivered a healthy baby girl, and both mother and child were doing well. But there was more. The lieutenant wanted to know if DeAndre would be interested in visiting the department's youth leadership program that weekend. As he considered the invitation, DeAndre found himself thinking about his father. The last time they'd spoken through the prison's visitation glass, his dad had seemed different, softer somehow, more reflective. "The system's broken, son," he'd said, "but that doesn't mean it can't be fixed. Sometimes change has to come from the inside." After school, DeAndre took a detour to the convenience store where everything had happened. Mr. Patel, the owner, waved him in enthusiastically. "My hero customer," he beamed. "You know, I've watched you grow up coming to this store. Always polite, always honest. Yesterday, you showed everyone what this community is really about." As DeAndre walked home, he noticed something different in how people looked at him. The same neighbors who'd usually offered cautious nods now smiled warmly. Even Officer Rodriguez, who regularly patrolled their block, stopped his car to shake DeAndre's hand. At home, he found his grandmother in deep conversation with Mrs. Washington from next door. The elderly woman had been like a neighborhood historian, living on the same corner for over 50 years. She'd seen the community transform through civil rights movements, economic hardships, and waves of change. "Come here, child," Mrs. Washington called out. "Your grandmother's been telling me about Lieutenant Chen's invitation. You know, 30 years ago, the idea of building bridges between our community and law enforcement seemed impossible. But here you are, proving that times really can change." That evening, as DeAndre worked on his homework, a call came from an unexpected source, the mayor's office. They wanted him to attend a community relations event the following week, where Officer Thompson would be present. The mayor believed their story could help inspire new dialogue about police-community relationships. His grandmother sat beside him as he processed the news. "You remember what I always told you about your grandfather?" she asked. DeAndre nodded. His grandfather had been one of the first black firefighters in their district, facing daily discrimination but never letting it harden his heart. "He used to say that real change doesn't come from grand gestures," she continued, her voice warm with memory. "It comes from small moments of human connection, from choosing to see the person behind the uniform or the color or the circumstances." Later that night, DeAndre finally gathered the courage to call his father in prison. As the collect call connected, he could hear the pride in his father's voice. "I saw you on the news, son. You did exactly what I hoped you'd do. You saw someone in need and helped them, no questions asked." They talked longer than usual, about choices and consequences, about the possibility of change, about the future. His father shared stories about his own teenage years, about the moments where a different choice might have led him down a different path. "You know what's funny?" his father said, his voice thick with emotion. "I always worried that my mistakes would cast a shadow over your life. But here you are, turning that shadow into light." Before bed, DeAndre pulled out Lieutenant Chen's card again, running his fingers over the embossed letters. The youth leadership program could be a step towards something bigger, not just for him, but for his community. He thought about Officer Thompson's baby, born into a world that might be a little bit better because of one simple choice he'd made. His phone buzzed with a text from his basketball teammate, "Saw you on the news, bro. You're showing everyone that our generation can be different. We're all proud of you." As he lay in bed, DeAndre reflected on how much had changed in just 2 days. The simple act of helping someone in need had opened doors he never knew existed, creating possibilities that seemed impossible just days ago. But with these opportunities came questions and responsibilities he'd need to navigate carefully. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The mayor's office would want to tell their story, but DeAndre was determined to ensure it served a greater purpose than just positive publicity. He wanted real change, the kind his father talked about, the kind his grandfather had worked toward, the kind his community deserved. The mayor's office was nothing like DeAndre had imagined. Sitting in a plush chair beside his mother and grandmother, he felt both out of place and exactly where he needed to be. The room buzzed with activity, city officials, community leaders, and media representatives all gathered to discuss what they were calling the Thompson-Johnson Initiative. Officer Thompson sat across from him, her newborn daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. She looked different in civilian clothes, more approachable somehow. Her husband, the civil rights attorney, stood behind her chair, his hand resting supportively on her shoulder. What happened that day, Officer Thompson addressed the room, her voice steady and clear, wasn't just about a young man helping an officer in distress. It was about seeing past uniforms and stereotypes to recognize our shared humanity. The baby stirred, and Officer Thompson adjusted her hold. "I'd like to announce that we're naming her Hope," she continued, her eyes meeting DeAndre's. "Because that's what this moment represents for our city." DeAndre listened as the mayor outlined plans for a new youth police engagement program. The initiative would provide mentorship, educational support, and career guidance to young people from underserved communities. But what caught his attention was the mention of a review board for cases like his father's, cases where rehabilitation and community reintegration might be possible. During a break in the meeting, Officer Thompson's husband approached DeAndre. "Your father's case," he said quietly, "I'd like to review it, if you're comfortable with that. Sometimes the system needs to acknowledge its mistakes to move forward." DeAndre's mother squeezed his hand, and he could feel her trembling slightly. They hadn't dared to hope for something like this. His grandmother's words from years ago echoed in his mind, "God doesn't waste pain, He uses it to build bridges." The media coverage that followed was intense but focused on the larger implications rather than just the dramatic rescue. Local newspapers ran stories about community policing initiatives, featuring interviews with both DeAndre and Officer Thompson. But it was the smaller, more personal moments that truly marked the beginning of change. That weekend, DeAndre attended his first youth leadership program session at the police department. Lieutenant Chen had assembled a diverse group of teenagers from across the city. Some came from privileged backgrounds, others from circumstances similar to DeAndre's. All shared a desire to be part of the solution. During one exercise, they were asked to share their experiences with law enforcement. DeAndre spoke about his father's imprisonment, about growing up with complicated feelings toward the police, about learning to see beyond his own pain to recognize shared humanity. A young girl in the program, whose mother was a detective, shared her constant fear of losing a parent in the line of duty. Their stories, though different, revealed common ground, the desire for safety, understanding, and respect. Back in his neighborhood, changes were subtle but significant. Officer Rodriguez started organizing basketball games between local teens and off-duty officers. Mr. Patel's convenience store became an unofficial community meeting spot, where residents and police officers could chat informally over coffee. One evening, as DeAndre helped his grandmother prepare dinner, she shared stories about his grandfather's early days as a firefighter. "He faced so much resistance," she recalled, chopping vegetables with practiced ease. "But he always said that change happens one relationship at a time. You're living his legacy, baby." The following week brought unexpected news from prison. Thanks to Officer Thompson's husband's intervention, DeAndre's father's case was being reviewed. Years of good behavior, combined with new evidence suggesting over-sentencing, opened the possibility of early release. During their next visit, DeAndre found his father different, energized, hopeful. "Your actions didn't just save Officer Thompson," he said through the visitation glass. "They might have saved our family too." But more importantly, they're saving other families from going through what we did. At school, DeAndre's experience began inspiring others. His basketball teammates started volunteering with community programs. The school administration launched a peer mediation program, with DeAndre as one of its first trained mediators. One particularly meaningful moment came when Officer Thompson brought baby Hope to visit DeAndre's family. As his grandmother cradled the infant, decades of distrust seemed to melt away. They shared stories, laughed together, and talked about their hopes for the future. "You know," Officer Thompson said, watching DeAndre interact with Hope, "when I first joined the force, I thought I knew what service meant. But that day showed me that true service isn't about power or authority, it's about connection and compassion." The initiative continued to grow, spreading to other neighborhoods and cities. DeAndre found himself speaking at community events, sharing his story not as a hero, but as a testament to what could happen when people chose to see each other's humanity. His mother noticed changes in him too, a new confidence, a sense of purpose. "You're carrying yourself differently," she observed one morning. "Like you finally understand your place in the world." That understanding was tested when tensions flared in a neighboring district over a controversial arrest. Instead of taking sides, DeAndre helped organize a community dialogue session, bringing together residents and officers to address underlying issues and find common ground. As autumn settled over Chicago, the ripple effects of the Thompson-Johnson initiative continued to spread. DeAndre found himself navigating new responsibilities while trying to maintain his normal teenage life. Basketball practice, homework, and family dinners remained constants, anchoring him as his world expanded in unexpected ways. The news about his father's case progressed steadily. Officer Thompson's husband, working pro bono, had uncovered evidence suggesting his father's sentence had been disproportionately harsh compared to similar cases. The possibility of his father's early release moved from a distant hope to a tangible reality. One crisp Saturday morning, DeAndre sat in the prison's visiting room, sharing the latest developments with his father. "Things are changing, Dad," he said, pressing his hand against the glass. "The review board is looking at dozens of cases like yours now. They're calling it restorative justice." His father's eyes shone with unshed tears. "You know, son, all these years I've carried this guilt, not just for my actions, but for leaving you without a father. Now I see that maybe my absence pushed you to become something greater than I could have taught you to be." The youth leadership program had grown beyond its original scope. What started as weekly meetings now included community service projects, mentorship opportunities, and even college preparation workshops. DeAndre watched as former rivals from different neighborhoods worked together, breaking down barriers that had divided their communities for generations. At school, his history teacher, Mr. Reynolds, asked him to speak to the class about community activism. Sometimes, DeAndre told his peers, the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. It's not about being a hero, it's about being human. The conversation with his classmates revealed how many of them had similar stories: families affected by the justice system, complicated relationships with law enforcement, dreams of making a difference. Their discussion ran over into lunch period, with even the usually disinterested students fully engaged. One afternoon, Lieutenant Chen invited DeAndre to observe a new officer training session. The department had incorporated elements of the Thompson-Johnson initiative into their standard protocol, emphasizing community engagement and cultural understanding. "See that officer there?" Lieutenant Chen pointed to a young rookie. "She grew up in the same neighborhood as you. 5 years ago, she wouldn't have considered joining the force. Now she sees it as a way to serve her community." The initiative's success attracted attention from neighboring cities. DeAndre found himself traveling with Officer Thompson to speak at police academies and community centers. They shared their story not as a fairy tale of instant transformation, but as proof that change was possible through persistent, intentional effort. During one such presentation, a teenager in the audience asked DeAndre if he planned to become a police officer. The question gave him pause. "I'm not sure yet," he answered honestly. "But I've learned that there are many ways to serve your community. The important thing is to stay open to possibilities you never considered before." Back home, his grandmother's health began to decline, though her spirit remained as strong as ever. From her favorite chair by the window, she continued to dispense wisdom to the steady stream of visitors seeking her counsel. "Your grandfather would say that hope is like a garden," she told DeAndre. "It needs daily tending, but the harvest feeds everyone." The mayor's office announced plans to expand the initiative's scholarship program, ensuring that participants could pursue higher education without financial barriers. DeAndre helped design the application process, insisting that it consider not just academic achievement but community involvement and personal growth. One evening, as he helped Mr. Patel close the convenience store, the old man shared something unexpected. "You know, before all this, I was planning to sell the store and move. Too much tension, too many close calls. But now?" He gestured to the community bulletin board filled with flyers for initiative programs. "Now I feel like I'm part of something important." Officer Thompson's baby Hope had become a symbol of possibility in the community. At 3 months old, she attended community events in a onesie that read "Building Bridges, One Day at a Time." Her presence reminded everyone that they were working for the next generation's future. DeAndre's mother noticed other changes too. The emergency room where she worked saw fewer violence-related injuries from their neighborhood. "It's not perfect," she told him, "but it's better. Sometimes better is enough to build on." The initiative's youth council, which DeAndre helped establish, began addressing other community issues beyond police relations. They organized cleanup drives, tutoring programs, and mental health awareness campaigns. The teens learned that empowerment in one area often led to positive changes in others. During a particularly meaningful council meeting, they were joined by a surprise guest, a recently released former inmate who'd served time with DeAndre's father. He shared his story of rehabilitation and the importance of community support in preventing recidivism. As winter approached, preparations began for a holiday community celebration, the first of its kind in their neighborhood. Officers and residents would share meals, exchange stories, and plan for the future. The event symbolized how far they'd come, while acknowledging how far they still had to go. Winter in Chicago brought both challenges and unexpected blessings. The holiday community celebration, despite the biting cold, drew hundreds of residents. The local community center buzzed with warmth and conversation as people from all walks of life shared meals and stories. But the most significant development came on a snowy Tuesday morning when DeAndre's phone rang during first period. His mother's voice trembled with emotion. "Baby, they're releasing your father. The review board approved his case. He'll be home before Christmas." The news spread quickly through their tight-knit community. Officer Thompson's husband had successfully argued that the combination of good behavior, evidence of rehabilitation, and the changed community circumstances warranted early release. The decision set a precedent for similar cases across the city. DeAndre's grandmother, despite her weakening health, insisted on organizing the homecoming. "Your grandfather always said that healing happens around a full table," she reminded him as they planned the menu. Her hands might have slowed, but her spirit remained undiminished. The days leading up to his father's release were filled with nervous energy. DeAndre threw himself into basketball practice, staying late in the gym to work through his complex emotions. Coach Brown found him there one evening, shooting free throws in the dim light. "You know," the coach said, rebounding for him, "sometimes the hardest victories are the ones we don't know how to celebrate. It's okay to feel everything you're feeling right now." The youth leadership program participants rallied around DeAndre, helping to prepare for his father's return. They cleaned and painted the spare room in his family's apartment, turning it into a space that spoke of new beginnings. Lieutenant Chen arranged for job training programs and counseling services to ease the transition. On release day, DeAndre stood with his mother and grandmother outside the prison gates. The man who walked toward them looked both familiar and strange, thinner, grayer, but with the same warm eyes DeAndre remembered from childhood. They embraced for the first time in 8 years, and words seemed inadequate to express the moment's weight. "Look at you," his father said, holding him at arm's length. "You've grown into the man I always hoped you'd be." His voice caught as he added, "And you've done it without me there to show you how." The drive home was quiet, filled with gentle conversation about small things, the weather, the neighborhood changes, DeAndre's basketball season. But beneath the ordinary talk ran currents of deeper emotion, of time lost and found, of hurt and healing. Their arrival home brought surprise. The street was lined with neighbors, including Officer Thompson and Baby Hope, Mr. Patel with bags of groceries, and dozens of others whose lives had been touched by the initiative. They formed a welcome line, offering not judgment but support. Officer Thompson stepped forward first, Hope cooing in her arms. "Your son," she told DeAndre's father, "taught us all about second chances. We're here to make sure you get yours." The following weeks brought adjustments. DeAndre watched his father navigate the changed world with a mixture of determination and humility. Technology had evolved, the neighborhood had transformed, but the most significant changes were in the people themselves. At the youth leadership program, DeAndre's father was invited to share his story. He spoke honestly about his mistakes, his time in prison, and the pride he felt watching his son build bridges he never thought possible. The teens listened intently, asking questions that revealed their own experiences with family separation and redemption. Christmas approached, bringing with it the first real family holiday in years. DeAndre's grandmother, though confined to her chair more often now, orchestrated the celebrations with joy. The apartment filled with the scent of her famous sweet potato pie as 3 generations worked together in the small kitchen. One evening, DeAndre found his father sitting alone on their small balcony, staring at the city lights. "I keep thinking about choices," his father said as DeAndre joined him. "That day you helped Officer Thompson, you could have walked away. Most people would have. But you chose differently." "I thought about you," DeAndre admitted. "About what you said about being the change our neighborhood needs." The initiative continued to evolve. The mayor's office announced plans for a comprehensive rehabilitation program, inspired by DeAndre's father's successful reintegration. Other families affected by the justice system began to see hope in their own situations. At school, DeAndre's grades remained strong despite his many commitments. His teachers noted that other students seemed motivated by his example, not just in academics but in community involvement. The peer mediation program he helped establish had reduced conflicts significantly. One particularly cold afternoon, as DeAndre helped his father prepare for a job interview, they heard his grandmother calling from her room. They found her breathing heavily, but smiling. "I had a dream about your grandfather," she told them. "He was so proud of his boys, both of you." The transition from winter to spring brought significant changes to the Johnson family and their community. DeAndre's father secured a position at a construction company through one of the initiative's employment programs. His first paycheck prompted tears, not from its modest amount, but from the dignity of honest work and the chance to contribute to his family again. One mild March morning, DeAndre's grandmother's health took a serious turn. The family rushed her to Mercy Hospital, where DeAndre's mother's colleagues received them with care and concern. As they waited for news, the hospital corridor filled with people whose lives his grandmother had touched, neighbors, church members, even Officer Thompson with Baby Hope. "Your grandmother," Officer Thompson said softly, sitting beside DeAndre, "she's been the heart of this initiative in ways many people don't see. Every community meeting, she's there making sure everyone feels heard. Every new program, she's there offering wisdom from years of experience." The doctors managed to stabilize her condition, but the incident served as a wake-up call. The family began taking turns staying with her, creating a schedule that allowed her to remain at home while ensuring she was never alone. DeAndre's father took the night shift, using those quiet hours to rebuild their relationship through shared stories and memories. During one such night, his grandmother shared something unexpected. "I've been holding on to your grandfather's journals," she told them, directing them to a box in her closet. "He wrote about his dreams for this community, about the changes he hoped to see. Sometimes it feels like he knew you would be the one to carry those dreams forward." The journals revealed a vision remarkably similar to what the Thompson-Johnson initiative had become. DeAndre's grandfather had written about breaking cycles of mistrust, about building bridges between law enforcement and the community, about creating opportunities for young people to lead change. At the youth leadership program, DeAndre shared excerpts from his grandfather's journals, sparking discussions about generational change and the importance of documenting their own journey. The teens began collecting stories from their community, creating a digital archive of transformation. Lieutenant Chen noticed the impact these stories had on new police recruits. "When they see the history," he explained, "when they understand the context of our community's pain and healing, it changes how they approach their role. They start seeing themselves as part of a larger story." DeAndre's father immersed himself in community work during his off hours, particularly mentoring young men at risk of making the same mistakes he had. His authenticity and humility made him especially effective with teens who initially resisted any connection with the initiative. One young man, whose brother was serving time, approached DeAndre after a basketball game. "Your dad," he said hesitantly, "he talks to us like he understands. Not just the mistakes, but the pressure, the choices that don't feel like choices. It makes a difference." The initiative's success began attracting attention from social researchers and policy makers. They wanted to understand how a single act of kindness had sparked such widespread change. DeAndre found himself explaining repeatedly that the real story wasn't about that one moment, but about the countless small choices that followed. Spring brought college acceptance letters. DeAndre had options. Several universities offered scholarships through the initiative, including programs in criminal justice, social work, and community development. The decision weighed heavily on him until a conversation with his father brought clarity. "You know what I learned in prison?" his father shared one evening. "Education isn't just about books and careers. It's about understanding systems, how they work, how they fail, and how they can be fixed. Choose the path that lets you keep building bridges." Officer Thompson's husband continued his work reviewing similar cases, using DeAndre's father's successful reintegration as a model. The process was slow, but each success story strengthened the argument for reform. Families who had lost hope began to see possibilities for reunion and redemption. In the neighborhood, subtle changes continued. The convenience store where everything began had transformed into a community hub. Mr. Patel installed a small coffee counter where officers and residents could share informal conversations. The walls displayed artwork from local youth, including pieces that explored themes of justice and reconciliation. DeAndre's mother noticed changes in her emergency room too. "We're seeing more prevention, more intervention before things escalate," she told him. "When people trust the system, they reach out for help earlier." His grandmother's health stabilized enough for her to attend community events again, though now she held court from a comfortable chair, dispensing wisdom and warm smiles to all who sought her counsel. Baby Hope, now crawling and babbling, became a frequent visitor, bringing joy to the elderly woman's days. One evening, as the family shared dinner with Officer Thompson's family, DeAndre realized how much had changed. A year ago, such a scene would have seemed impossible, a black family with a formerly incarcerated father sharing a meal with a police officer's family, discussing hopes for the future. As summer approached again, marking nearly a year since that fateful day with Officer Thompson, DeAndre found himself reflecting on the journey during quiet moments in his grandfather's community garden. The once neglected space had been revitalized as part of the initiative, becoming a symbol of growth and healing in the neighborhood. His father had taken special interest in the garden, spending weekends teaching local kids about nurturing plants and patience. In prison, he explained while showing a young boy how to check soil moisture, "I dreamed about growing things. There's something powerful about helping life flourish." The garden became a metaphor for their community's transformation. Different plants thrived together, requiring varying levels of care and attention, just as different community members needed different kinds of support to flourish. The harvest was shared among neighbors, breaking down old barriers through simple acts of generosity. DeAndre's decision about college had finally crystallized. He'd chosen a local university's urban development program, allowing him to continue his work with the initiative while pursuing his education. The scholarship committee, impressed by his commitment to community growth, had offered full funding. His grandmother's reaction to the news touched everyone. "You're choosing to stay close to your roots," she said, her voice strong despite her frail appearance. "That's what real leadership is, not running away to bigger things, but making the small things bigger through love and dedication." The initiative had evolved beyond its original scope. What began as a bridge between law enforcement and the community now addressed broader systemic issues. DeAndre worked with Officer Thompson to develop programs focusing on education, mental health, and economic opportunity. One breakthrough came when the city approved funding for a community center in their neighborhood. The planning committee insisted on unique features: a technology lab for youth coding classes, a legal aid office, counseling services, and a cafe staffed by formerly incarcerated individuals working to rebuild their lives. DeAndre's father took a leadership role in the center's employment program, drawing from his own experience to create meaningful opportunities for others. "Every person who finds legitimate work," he often said, "is someone's father, mother, or child finding their way back to hope." The youth leadership program continued to expand, with new chapters opening in neighboring districts. DeAndre helped train young facilitators, teaching them the delicate art of building trust and fostering dialogue. His own experience had taught him that authentic change required both patience and persistence. One particularly meaningful development came through the story-sharing initiative they'd started. Community members, both residents and law enforcement, recorded their experiences of transformation. These stories, shared through social media and community events, helped other neighborhoods envision their own potential for change. Officer Thompson, now back on full duty, had become a trainer for new recruits, incorporating lessons from the initiative into standard police training. "We're not just teaching procedures," she explained during a community meeting. "We're teaching humanity, how to see beyond assumptions and connect with the people we serve." Baby Hope's first birthday celebration became a community event, held in the garden DeAndre's father had helped revive. As people gathered to celebrate, the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. This child, born during a moment of crisis, now toddled among flowers and vegetables grown by hands working together for change. DeAndre's mother received a promotion at the hospital, heading a new community health outreach program inspired by the initiative's success. Her years of experience in the emergency room had shown her the importance of preventive care and community trust in healthcare systems. One evening, while helping his father repair the garden's irrigation system, DeAndre broached a subject they'd both been avoiding. "Do you ever regret the years we lost?" he asked, watching his father's hands work steadily with the tools. His father paused, choosing his words carefully. "I regret my choices and the pain they caused," he answered. "But seeing how you've turned that pain into purpose, that's not regret. That's redemption. Sometimes the darkest soil grows the strongest plants." The initiative's youth council took on ambitious new projects. They organized mental health workshops, recognizing the trauma that many young people carried. They created mentorship programs pairing middle school students with high school seniors. They even developed a mobile app helping residents access community resources and emergency services. DeAndre's grandmother, though physically weaker, remained the initiative's moral compass. From her front porch, she continued hosting what she called wisdom circles, informal gatherings where young and old could share concerns and celebrations. Her lived experience of the community's history gave context to current changes. The impact spread beyond their immediate neighborhood. Other communities began implementing similar programs, adapting the initiative's principles to their specific needs. DeAndre and Officer Thompson were invited to speak at conferences, sharing their story not as a blueprint but as proof of possibility. As the first anniversary of that life-changing summer day approached, DeAndre sat in the garden his father had helped rebuild, watching the sunset paint the Chicago skyline in shades of gold. The community had planned a celebration, not just of a single moment of heroism, but of a year of collective transformation. In the past week alone, 3 more families had received news of case reviews, similar to what had brought DeAndre's father home. Officer Thompson's husband had established a legal clinic at the community center, dedicated to helping families navigate the complex process of justice system reform. His grandmother's health had stabilized enough for her to attend the anniversary celebration. Though she needed her wheelchair now, her presence commanded the same respect it always had. God doesn't waste a single story, she often reminded people who came to her for guidance. Every struggle, every triumph, becomes part of the larger tapestry. The celebration took place in the park near where DeAndre had first helped Officer Thompson. The space had been transformed, new playground equipment installed, basketball courts resurfaced, and community art projects adorning the walls. Children played while their parents, both residents and police officers, chatted comfortably nearby. Officer Thompson brought baby Hope, now walking and curious about everything. The little girl had become a neighborhood favorite, toddling between groups with innocent trust that seemed to remind everyone why they'd committed to change. She had special affection for DeAndre's grandmother, often climbing into her lap during community meetings. DeAndre's father stood at the grill, cooking alongside Officer Rodriguez, a sight that still amazed longtime residents. Their easy conversation and shared laughter spoke volumes about how far things had come. Nearby, Mr. Patel handed out free ice cream from his store, refusing payment with his characteristic warm smile. The Youth Leadership Program members had prepared a special presentation. They documented the year's changes through photographs, stories, and statistics. The numbers were impressive: decreased arrests, increased community program participation, improved school attendance. But the real impact showed in the faces of people who now saw hope where they'd once seen only obstacles. Lieutenant Chen announced new developments in the initiative. The program would receive state-level funding, allowing it to expand to other cities. DeAndre's model of youth involvement would become a central component, with paid internships for young people interested in community development and law enforcement reform. As evening approached, DeAndre took the microphone, something that no longer made him nervous. Looking out at the gathered crowd, his father standing proud, his mother wiping happy tears, Officer Thompson bouncing hope on her hip, he felt the weight of their collective journey. A year ago, he began, I made a choice that seemed simple at the time. But the real heroes are all of you, who chose every day since then to believe in something bigger than our differences. Every person who attended a meeting, shared a meal with a former stranger, or gave someone a second chance, you're the ones who turned a moment into a movement. The initiative had proven that change wasn't just possible, it was sustainable when built on genuine relationships and consistent effort. Other cities had begun sending representatives to learn from their experience, but DeAndre always emphasized that each community needed to find its own path to healing. His father's success story had become a beacon of hope. Now employed as the community center's operations manager, he counseled other returning citizens while overseeing programs that helped families rebuild. His experience on both sides of the system made him uniquely qualified to bridge gaps and offer practical solutions. DeAndre's mother had expanded her hospital's community health program, incorporating lessons learned from the initiative about trust building and accessible care. She'd created a network of community health advocates who helped residents navigate medical systems and access preventive care. As the celebration continued into the evening, stories flowed freely. Officer Thompson shared her perspective on that crucial day, adding details DeAndre hadn't known, like how she'd been close to requesting a desk assignment due to concerns about community tensions. Sometimes, she said, trust comes from our most vulnerable moments. The Youth Council presented their plans for the coming year, including a scholarship program for children of incarcerated parents and a mentorship network connecting successful returning citizens with those still in the system. Their confidence and clarity showed how far they'd come from being just participants to becoming true leaders. His grandmother, holding court from her wheelchair under a shade tree, shared stories of the neighborhood's past while expressing hope for its future. "I've seen this community torn apart and stitched back together," she told the young people gathered around her. "But this time, we're not just fixing what's broken, we're building something entirely new." As night fell and families began heading home, DeAndre stood with his father at the garden's edge. Together, they watched the fireflies dance among the plants they'd tended together. "You know," his father said softly, "when I was inside, I used to worry that my mistakes would define your life. Instead, you've shown how to turn mistakes into missions." The Thompson-Johnson initiative had become more than a program, it was a testament to the power of choosing hope over fear, understanding over judgment, and perseverance over pessimism. As DeAndre prepared for college and the next phase of his journey, he knew that this story belonged not just to him, but to every person who dared to believe in the possibility of change.